I hope this is okay. Hopefully it's okay. I'm gonna share this link. Ooh. Check. Is the mic working? I hope it is. Ooh, someone's already online. Quick study. I hope the volume is. I can't really check if the volume is going okay. Can you listen to the stream? Tell me the volume is okay. I think it should be. I'm not entirely sure though. While I make the effort to move these things into place. Hello, single viewer. Oh, the glare is terrible. I'm upset, spaghetti, about that. The issue with this is that you don't get to see the projector too well. Maybe I'll just put it over there instead afterwards. I don't know.
For me, it's like my podcast app keeps intercepting me, like clicking on the link and taking me to the podcast app.
Yeah, I posted a link on Twitter and the IAA-GameCamp Discord. So just
Clicking on the link isn't working for me. The podcast app is saying, "Oh, here's a podcast. Here, let me open up the podcast."
Boo.
I'm gonna have it. Should we have a website?
Yeah, password's over there.
Oh, okay. Well, let me do that first. It's a really nice whiteboard.
Yeah, it's specifically designed for, I forgot the name of the process. There's a very specific process that like allows you to essentially get your goals on target and understand your product has and does not have and what we can actually sell. What's the name of the tool? Okay, we got it. Oh. Addie's memory is a tragic subject.
Yeah.
only slightly warm in here. Hello, viewers. Can you hear me?
Can you see the comments on there?
I do not see live chat going off right now.
Probably have them.
If you plug in your headphones, can you hear me?
I can't get it on.
Okay, I'm gonna try.
I have a laptop. What am I doing?
No, it's fine. I can go on my thingamajig.
Where is the microphone?
It's in my computer.
Uh,
Yeah. I didn't want to carry too much stuff, so it's just like a thing to deal with. Okay, I'm gonna go outside the room. Oh wait, what? I posted the wrong link by accident.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. Boop. Boop. Edited. Boop. Okay, changed. Now it should be okay. Hopefully. Okay, I'm gonna go out of the room real quick. And Vanessa.
Hey.
Hello.
What's up?
I can't be cool, so I will try. Oh wow, people are just waiting outside, not coming in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You want to actually?
So it says 6:30 on the sign.
It says grade 6.
Yeah.
I think there should be more chairs. If there's like 40 people showing.
Is that how many people are sleeping?
I like that. There's a lot. There's a big number. There was a big number as of the other day.
We added 640 at some point somewhere. In one of the Discords.
Okay.
Or possibly Twitter.
Hello.
Hi, everybody. So I can start.
How are you? Anthony, this is Addy. This is head of the
Nice to meet you.
games den. He's a cool guy. From what I've heard.
Showering compliments. Today's a good day.
What?
You're
A cool guy is not. That's a very low.
That's
level.
shallow.
Are you kidding me? I'm trying not to build up to it. So you can wow him yourself.
Really?
I set the standard low.
This is Aaron.
Nice to meet you. Yeah.
Huh?
Okay. Hi.
You
If-
excited for tomorrow? Are you leaving tonight right after this?
Tonight, right after
Are you
this.
No, you don't drive. Who's driving you?
Mike. Do you Mike?
Cool.
Mike.
Oh, Max.
Mike Zerhun, do you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going with him. So it's like, cool.
Nice.
He's like, I have a car. I couldn't drive me.
It sounds like he just missed, like, yes, talks, but also the keynote.
Like, but like the favorite people, like Rami.
Yeah.
Robert
Oh, did they
Honey.
talk today?
No, they're talking to
Sick.
tomorrow, so I get to.
And you're not missing that then?
I'm not missing my heroes.
Yeah, no FOMO there.
Yeah, no problem there. Graham McAllister is talking today on UX, and I'm missing that. So I'm upset about that because he's proposing a really interesting model called the sync model, which is like his way to craft user experiences
Yeah.
and build proper teams, which I think is really interesting. That's a very, very hard thing to tackle.
Well, I'm excited for this because again, the UX panel at Press A was for me. That was my graduating present to myself, and then I had to moderate 2 panels during it.
Yeah.
So I finally get to hear her speak.
That's really awesome. She's talking on ethics in game UX. I think it's super cool because like a lot of people from the tech industry and the game industry, like UX is like this nice middle ground, which is slightly different for both industries.
Yeah.
People can learn from each other a lot. I think that is a merit of these kinds of things. Hopefully people like it enough. I posted a survey.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
I will actually write down the link to that survey.
I mean, are you connected to the director?
The connection with directors is there.
Oh.
My thing does not have an
Okay.
HDMI.
Oh yeah.
So I have to write it down. I totally forgot about that. It was totally my bad.
I mean, it was all through Eventbrite, right? Because you can send out, using Eventbrite, you can send follow-up to all the attendees, so then that way you don't miss anyone, unless they're just showing up without sending it out. But at that point, you post it wherever you can, right?
I agree. I didn't remember that. I should do that 100%. Okay, I'm gonna write that down.
Do you need a hand anything?
If y'all want to put chairs out, I don't know. I feel like there are like 50 signups on the Eventbrite. I don't know how many of them are actually gonna make it today. So, like, we'll just play it by ear, I guess.
How do you want these seats arranged? How do you want these seats arranged?
Just in rows, like
In an order to
Rows? You don't like policy.
goes all face to face.
Two circular, because then you can maximize the speaker space so that she's not crowded in.
yeah, like kind of like a curve. I
Yeah.
suppose would be nice.
Yeah, these are locked together. Do you want like one more, or is that one link is all open?
No, I would do, so don't go beyond this table. Yeah, because you don't want to crowd her in
Yeah.
too much.
Well, if we get the front line set, we can kind of space it out.
Oh, just the pillar.
And then I would leave some space down the middle so that people can easily, so do that.
Lots of it's perfect. I think these ones are fun.
Think of it this way, they're using UX right now. How can we best design this room?
I can, floor, okay, so that's all I have.
Well, no, I'm not gonna talk about Fort since it's not.
I'm a big dumb, so I think you said it probably wouldn't get it. Okay.
You could move this back with how much space people have. No, you want to leave that space because the people like here and here can more easily get out to that. Did you bring me cookies?
Which is much more than I was expecting.
Cookies, you brought a lot of people.
Ooh, cookies.
There are more.
Cookies.
There's also a single gluten-free tartlet. I think that is pumpkin.
How was your bake sale?
We get $300.
Nice.
It's crazy. Unexpected.
Yeah, I think we were about 400. The second day was really slow.
Oh wow,
Elvin
really?
Non's not a good place to
Yeah.
bake
Yo.
sale.
We had 5 hours
Yeah.
stand. So within 5 hours, like my donation too.
Yeah.
So there are people who dropped 50 cents, who dropped $20, and I'm like, whoa, why are you giving us all this money?
Because they want to get rid of change.
It's like, okay, I'll take it.
I've done that.
So you know what I did take it.
No. So where's the?
Yes.
Oh, you're betting.
anyone they see, like, knows me as all.
Anyone they see consider about $2.
I can
Also, there are name tags over here, so I'd like to stick one on your chest. Well,
Chest.
just stick one on your jacket when you're wearing. Feel free.
Yeah.
Right after this, okay, yeah. That's super lucky. Yeah, like for 3 years.
Yeah.
It's a big world. Yeah, I know. My suitcase is kind of gagging. Look at my circular chair.
Do you like the place? Where'd you end up figuring out where to stay?
Oh, I got a scholarship, so.
Oh, yeah, you got the, yeah. No, it was for the other person.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Hey Craig, let me know if everything is sounding okay for you.
Hopefully that will be.
Hi, I'm Jetty.
I'm not using your social capital.
Pardon, what's your name?
Jetty.
Yeah, people were starting out. And it's Starbucks.
No, I don't.
You don't like
Yeah,
Starbucks.
like, that's my name.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. I guess a lot of people must say that though.
A lot of people. Wednesday, like,
Fair enough.
oh, Jetty, oh, Jenna.
Might as well start right.
Right?
Then every person thinks they're original. They're like, oh, I just thought of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you had the right idea using the pen. All I can smell now is this marker.
I love the smell of the shark. I'm sorry. Like
You
whiteboard.
shouldn't.
Why? It doesn't good.
That's how it's bad for your brain.
Oh, that's probably why I'm failing.
Oh my god.
Sing like a shark.
Yeah.
I wonder if more people are gonna be stuck outside.
Whoa, I never thought of that.
Permanent
I
pie.
am permanently damaged.
It's not a washburn.
I got the book for that.
It's no rehab for you.
Yeah, well, at least.
It's like 3 similarities.
So 50 people.
Why is it so
Apparently, that's their event price.
So our attendance is going to be about 5.
We've already exceeded 5. I don't know what you're talking about here.
Oh, this is a much nicer texture than the one I had before.
Oh.
Crunchy? You know, like, it was only like when you bite into it that it like rips crisps apart. It was good.
I mean, the shell is like free of anything that makes it food, so it's gluten, nuts, soy. No, Sadie made this.
She did amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know how she recovered.
They're real good.
All bad.
I'm pretty sure the test shells were pre-made because the crimping is too perfect to be handled.
Yeah. She buys the.
Yeah. No, of course.
They
Yeah. Are you?
Oh, yeah, we do it. I in the game development.
You're my competition too.
It's a
I
good
don't
fun.
know anything.
Guess I'm looking at you.
Games. So I joined, and then John posted UX meetup. And okay, cool.
I think that's the
Oh,
first
good.
one.
Right when people want.
So it's back to propaganda then.
Exactly.
It's too late. They voted in last year. Even after he profusely ran on the election campaign of "Don't vote for John,"
Yeah.
they still voted for him.
Test candidacy.
He was very
It
transparent.
just
What
made-
is this?
It's a sugar cookie. Candy nugget. Or no, sorry, shortbread.
Like the university.
A pumpkin.
Oh, I'm so our counterpart, the game stand.
Okay, so that's the club.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm gonna see them all go stuck at the door.
Just for reference, Addie's the president.
He's my counterpart. This is their name. He's
Almost as if that would be
So,
Nick is dealing with the
huh?
Nick is
You
dealing
have-
with it. Yeah,
Does he have a stick? He got a new kitten.
Well, it's sort of somebody else, which is sad. No, wait, he's getting now, so that's happy.
he's just kind of living in his dad's house when his dad moved in. Yeah. So Nick has adopted it.
Yep. That
Cat.
sucks.
All the actual leads except for Outlook were gone for a pod, so we turned off the light and nobody could tell us anything. It's anarchy.
That's secret.
It's like what every other part of tech wants to do.
It's as if I'm not allowed to even say that I have.
No user experience.
You broke it.
It's so much better.
I'm gonna tell Aaron.
Standard stuff. Yeah, it's like the entire thing. It's almost all game design.
Nope.
You don't want to spend any time on it.
Literally,
So
the minute you sign it, it will be
hopefully this is
signed.
a meeting event.
That's what I noticed.
Not for Friday.
Oh, he's like the
The
second.
event is called Game UX.
I
I would argue
did not number one.
Yeah.
There are name tags and Wi-Fi on the board, man. Please help
I'm hungry.
Okay, the password is S.
You know where I go, right? Thank you for getting me those weekend. Yeah, trust me, you all that.
Really? Yeah. I'm so in the loop, man.
Okay, so I got a theme. Then you
Well,
can
that's cool.
Yeah.
Because
like every once in a while, I come across somebody who like
Totally like. I mean,
I'm sorry.
that's cool though. How's that?
Alright. I mean, it's my finals to finish. So really doesn't change my time at all.
Time for some shameless self-plug. Gonna use
The art that I did that I wrote.
only show you.
Wait, Princess, have you seen this?
You're welcome. It was actually I used
Yeah, you knew about it.
As in I changed the stuff.
Yeah.
No, I actually did.
Curtis said that he'll get back to you.
That's right.
Well, you know, you were gonna show you play some D&D and maybe get some man, like the few weeks I have to go without playing D&D is very worse. Like, really busy.
I'm sorry.
Show up and think about Dungeons and Dragons.
No, I know.
Well, you did ask Barry out my McDonald's earlier,
sorry.
so
You know what? You know what?
I know that's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tabletop, so you're just everything's in your imagination. Have you ever seen that?
Tell them the Borderlands. Oh, if you come to the November mixer, there will be D&D. Yeah. But yeah, Nick's gonna make some
Yeah, because it takes too long, even if you have
Yeah.
something. Are you sure you want to take class?
So like, you'll be characters there and you just pick one.
You know, you're gonna play. You're picking class.
Are you sure?
No,
Some people like at least that's model on the board.
Are these cookies open to everyone?
Yeah.
What generous people.
I love how they put this in
There's more?
Well, this is everything that's left after I used to D&D yesterday. Well, yeah, we had 2 tins of these.
That's fine.
Oh
Oh shit. We're doing a head count real quick, so I know what to expect next time.
It teaches you so many new skills.
like I don't forget this.
I just have to
Thank you for reminding me. Yeah.
It is.
How does it?
How to be an
Like,
not being afraid to make an ass of yourself. It's a really good thing. That's like D&D.
I also I saw yours and like, alright, you gotta know more.
Answers your character so quickly. You didn't even I remember one time my character and then also you're like start by D&D DM playing your mom is in trouble. You know play. I know play. I typed that so fast. I didn't even predict what it was. So I think that's where Pathfinder was. Pathfinder.
I'm gonna say 5 minutes before.
Pathfinder is like I'm finding it progressively harder to motivate myself in the thought that it's basically like a spin-off of Game of Thrones until we reach a game where VR and like stuff with AR, I guess. Essentially. And then like Wizards made like Quidditch something like it. I don't remember what order that happened.
I said maybe for sponsorship stuff. It's like
I feel like that was their small.
it's like
Guys, role play.
It's a virtual.
Pathfinder was like a nerd version. It wasn't like. Now there's Pathfinder.
Like, because there's like,
Yeah, exactly.
It was already so informal for the relevant.
I was actually talking to Nick. How crazy would it be? Like, somewhat similar. You're running around with characters. And the DM has like you can see your like little models running around. And then he can just select an NPC and and interact with the players and just zoom back out. That would be
There's just reacting out. It's like, oh, this is different. Doing this thing takes 1 action. Doing this thing takes 2. That sounds like my kind of game.
yeah.
It's like
Wow.
yeah, that's part of me that like I don't like this thing of like bonus action.
Which of all these other actions are equivalent systems and
Yeah, so
you get this file, if you don't have or you can only use the media action. Yeah.
That's supposed to do both of them, because otherwise they would
Yeah.
No.
But people think
No, but the difference between media and service, media can happen not on. I like this. I like it.
I want to do that.
now, this is just whereas
Nice. Okay, thank you all for coming to Alberta's first Game UX meetup. What? Yeah, I'm super excited to be doing this. It's like a pilot run basically to see if people are interested in niche subjects such as this one, which I don't think should be niche in the first place. Yeah, this is a trial run to make sure to see the interest that people have in Edmonton and Alberta to just notice if more events from GameCamp can be diversified. So take a step in the upper to go a little bit higher level. This is a GameCamp event. A GameCamp, for those of you who don't know, is the International Game Developers Association chapter here in Edmonton. This event has been, thank you Start Edmonton for the space. They're not around right now, but I'll plug them anyway. Because Start Edmonton's awesome membership. If you want any help with tech stuff, mentorship, advice, starting your own business, this is the place to be. They offer awesome meetups that you should totally check out. If you're interested, yes, thanks Start Edmonton for that. The other organization that's helped make this event happen is Interactive Arts Alberta. They provided me a lot of support and infrastructure to make this thing happen. And we plan to make a lot more diversifications of GameCamp as time goes on. So thank you all for coming. Yeah, today's speaker, this amazing person over here. I want to let her introduce herself, but I don't want to butcher her name again. Yeah, everyone have a good time. There are name badges over there. We're writing your name over there. Also, Wi-Fi if you want to post pictures. And I'll talk about it later. Okay.
All right. Hello, everyone. This talk was initially supposed to be an introduction to UX, but we changed it last night. So instead, you're going to get a dose of ethics and design, and my thoughts around ethics and design. This is not normally. This is not what I normally do. I don't normally walk around and whack people over the head and say we have to think about ethics. But it is something that has been a long time coming. I've been thinking about this ever since I started my career in games. And it sort of came to a point in 2008, and that was like 11 years ago. So you might ask, why did it take you so long to put this talk together? I think that the time is right to start talking about these things in games now. And the reason that I want to do that is because when I spoke to a colleague back in 2008, one of the things that we talked about was taking responsibility for the things that we put out in the world. And my opinion was that we need to make sure that what we put into the world is something that we can be proud of, and something that we can defend, and something that we feel is right. But his response to my concerns about game companies not taking responsibility was basically, it's just a game, why do you care? But this talk is a rebuttal of that, and maybe I should have this discussion with him back in 2008, but I figured I'll pour it all on you instead, and hopefully I will be able to convince you why ethics is important by the end of this talk. So who am I, and why am I standing here talking to you? As you saw at the start of the talk, my name is Åsa Ros. I'm the principal UX designer, or a principal UX designer at Bioware here in Edmonton. And I started out in games 19 years ago, which is a long time ago. I accidentally got into game development. My education is within industrial design, so I started out wanting to create user interfaces for medical instruments. But when I was about to write my thesis, there were no companies where I could write my thesis, or maybe they just didn't want someone with not a degree touching their dialysis machines. So a friend of mine said, well, there's this mobile company here in Lund where I was, and so you should do your thesis there. And so I wrote a thesis called User Interfaces for Role-Playing on a Mobile Platform. And at that point, mobile phones had WAP and GPRS, which are basically internet protocols for mobile phones, and they were slow. And the things that we had to work with were text, links, and images that were 90 times 40 pixels and monochrome. So it was very limited at that point. But we did make a couple of good games. We did make text games as well, with texts that were limited to, I think, 60 characters back in that day, which is also kind of fun when you try to localize them, to translate them to Finnish. I do not recommend that because one text would be like one word. Finnish is a very tricky language. Usually you say, like in localization, you say, well, German is really tricky. Try Finnish sometime, that's of course. After that company actually folded. I've had a lot of companies that have folded. It's not my fault. I went to a place called UDS, Unique Development Studios in Gothenburg, in Sweden, and did my first console game called The Core Game. That was way back when there was an Xbox and only an Xbox, and it's like PlayStation and Xbox, those were consoles basically. And so we made it for the first Xbox. That company also folded, not my fault. And it took about until 2011. I think we started it, I was working there in 2003 or something. And in 2011, a friend of mine poked me on Facebook and said, you know, we've published the game now. I'm like, what game? The Core Game. We published the Core Game on Wii. And I was like, what? And so apparently the people who own the IP had taken it to a German publisher, and so it was published in German. And I played it, and some of my levels are actually still in there. That was kind of fun. After the Core Game, I went to a place called Suraken in Finland. I don't know if you've heard of Have a Hotel. It was a social space for tweens and teens, young teens. And they wanted me to create a game based on the Have a Hotel IP. So I helped create a game for the wildly successful console Engage. Not wildly successful. We created the game. It took about 2 years. When we started out, Nokia, who we were working with, said, "Okay, we want a single-player game because nobody plays multiplayer." And by the end of development, Nokia said, "Well, we want a multiplayer game because nobody plays single-player." So it was never released. It was a super fun game, and the core mechanic was digging. And for that game, I did basically everything. I did level design, game design, narrative design, the whole shebang. After that, I went back to Sweden, to Stockholm, and started at Avalanche Studios, worked on an undisclosed project that was later canceled for Disney. I was the army designer on that one, game designer, army designer. So basically what I tried to do was make a lot of creatures move in a way that was useful for both players and AI. That was tricky, let me tell you. That game never took off, so I moved on to Just Cause 2. And if you've ever played Just Cause 2 and you've blown up the rice pickers, I put them there. So shame on you. Basically what I was a world designer at that point. So basically what I did was I just looked at the world, I saw, okay, where do we need to put stuff down just to make sure that it's a varied world, there's a lot of activities going on there, and the player will have fun blowing things up, basically, including the rice pickers. It's okay. Unfortunately, that was the same time as we had a recession, meaning somewhere around 2008. So Avalanche had to let about 70 people go, I think, out of 140. And I was one of those who had to go. It didn't bother me that much because the week after I had a new job at a place called Moving for Fun, where we did a little console. It's got a little ball in the middle there. It's on a string. It's got an accelerometer in it. So basically, if you move it, it can feel that you're moving it. And so we can move on, because it also has a little engine in it, so we can move on the string, and so we movement games. And I was basically the whole design department for that little thing as well, web design, game design, UIs, UX, all of it. But we were about 5 people at that company, so it wasn't that weird that I was doing all of those things. That company also folded, not my fault, because we were working with investment money, meaning that, or venture capital, meaning that the venture capital eventually ran out, and we didn't get the console to market, unfortunately. So after that, I went back to Avalanche again, working as a producer that time. And I was basically, the hiring pitch was, okay, so we've got this kind of wild creative director who's doing stuff, and the development team can't really keep up with him. Could you please follow him around and make sure that he doesn't, tell them too many outrageous things? So my first 3 months, I think, at Avalanche consisted of following our creative director around, writing down all his feedback and making sure that the development team wouldn't start working on any of it until it was actually approved. But that was a lot of fun. He left, I stayed, and after about 2-3 years as a producer, I switched tracks and became a UX designer because we realized that Mad Max was in a bit of trouble with the UIs and with the UX. And so on Mad Max, I spent most of my time figuring out how to put 3D models in a 2D interface and balancing challenges. So that was my work at Mad Max. And then I went to, when Mad Max was released, I went to BioWare, worked on Anthem for 3 years. When Anthem was released, I went to another project, which hasn't really been revealed yet, so I can't really talk about it. But that's my background, so at least you know where I come from and what I've done previously. So let's get to the serious stuff. What is ethics? It's a good question. When I did this talk in Norway, there was a philosophy student coming up to me afterwards and said, that was a really simplified description of ethics. And I was like, yes, it was. So just so that you keep that in mind, that ethics is a wide subject, it's a massive subject. And you can talk about it for ages if you want. This talk specifically is about applied ethics, meaning ethical decisions in real life and their consequences. I would like to point out that this is not about morality, this talk. Morality is when you make a moral judgment around something. I'm pretty sure you've heard about the cake shop that refused to sell a wedding cake to a gay couple. That is a moral judgment. That cake shop owner made a moral judgment around what they thought about gay people, basically. And so moral judgments can be harmful. Ethics is about making sure, as it says, a set of concepts and principles that guide us in determining what behavior helps or harms sentient creatures. So that is the starting point that I am taking. And this talk is going to touch briefly on things like, what happens if I collect data on a certain set of players? And what am I using that data for? What happens if I encourage a certain content, a certain type of content in my games? What happens if I encourage a certain culture at the workplace? What happens if I hire only a certain subset of people from a certain culture to my company? And how do we arrange the world around us, and how are we affected by that arrangement? That is what this talk is about. So one of the things that has come up a couple of times, and something that I had a really interesting elevator conversation with another colleague here at BioWare, we were talking about how hard it is to make the right decisions, how hard it is to be ethical, how hard it is to include everyone who needs to be included. Because you have to include people in the culture, you have to include them in the content, you have to include them in the company, and you have to include them in the development team in order to create good content. So one of the things that I did to show why it's so important that we do this is I asked on Twitter 2 days before my first run through of this talk for examples. Because we used to say that games have no impact on people. We used to say that games don't really matter. It's just a game. We don't really care. But I believe that is a lie. One of the things that happened to me in around 2011 was that I was diagnosed with a clinical depression, meaning that I was not really looking to die, but I really didn't want to live either. So I was in a really, really bad place. My father got sick, and that probably had an impact on the depression. And in 2012, he died from the complications of his illness. And I was obviously devastated by this. But in March 2012, Mass Effect 3 was released. And I played that game on repeat, over and over and over again. And I think that one of the reasons that I'm still alive today is because I had Mass Effect to play and to escape to. So one of the things that I really want to impress on you is that what we put out there, what we put in the world is important. And it's time that we realize this as designers. So basically, I asked for examples. The things that came back was this: I would literally not be the person that I am without games. Games have brought me closer to the people, Games have brought me closer to people like friends, relatives, and partners. It made me feel less lonely. Bioware games helped me realize what kind of values I would really fight for, no matter how difficult to achieve, how to understand someone even when we don't share the same values, that nothing is just good or evil, and good friends can turn any tide. When I'm stressed, anxious, I start up Animal Crossing, Mass Effect, or Dragon Age. Just the theme music slows my heart rate down. You can even see it in my Fitbit stats. I met my husband in an online game. We just celebrated our 23rd wedding anniversary, so that's pretty cool too. It helps me deal with crushing chronic pain. I can engage deep enough to forget agony for a little while. One of my most joyful experiences have been playing games with my brothers. Games have introduced me to the friends I have collected for a lifetime. Games are the reason that I have the kids that I do, the spouse that I have, and the best friends and support system anyone could ask for. Games encourage us all to embrace our individuality and tell stories together. Social aspects of non-competitive games have helped me establish lasting friendships that don't involve alcohol. I dislike drunk people, bars are filthy and loud, or going to places where the sensory stimulation is overwhelming. My gaming friends are overwhelmingly neurodiverse. Monster Hunter World gave me predictable challenges and achievable goals in the middle of a move that seemed never ending. Without Mass Effect and Dragon Age, I may never have found the courage to finally come out. Both helped me feel like I would be accepted, and I was. Queer representation in Fallout New Vegas, in particular the way arcade storyline is handled, helped me come to terms with my sexuality, which had a huge positive impact on my mental health and life in general. So these were just a tiny portion of all the testimonies that I got when I asked that question. And it was within a couple of minutes, a couple of days just after asking that question. So with this, I want to really impress on you that we put good things out there, but we also put bad things out there. We as designers, if you're a designer, you practice ethics daily. Everything we do is a choice or the absence of making a choice. And what we do impact people. One of the sadder stories that came out lately was a game creator on Steam that decided to give a 41% discount on his games. 41% being the suicide rate for trans people. That was not a positive thing to do. That was doing intentional harm to a marginalized group in society. So my point is, we can ignore this. We can ignore that we have an impact, or we can take responsibility for it. The easy way, of course, is to ignore it, because then we don't have to think about it. Victor Papanek is a design theorist who wrote that you're responsible for what you put in the world, and you're responsible for the effects those things have in the world. He wrote a book called Design for the Real World, which is a really good read. So if you're interested in design theory at all, you should definitely pick it up and look it up. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that I'm using a book on universal design to raise issues that we have within game development. In industrial design, which is where my education is, basically, universal design has been a consideration for a very long time. The principles of universal design serves to break down barriers and to create a socially just environment. And yes, I am using the word social justice because this is, after all, about ethics in design, or ethics in game development. Universal design has its origin in the civil rights movement. That is also not a coincidence. The drive to change the environment and culture often come from those who are not privileged. In universal design, it's a desire to build spaces that aren't adapted to people with disadvantages in movement, sight, or other disabilities. Instead, the spaces are built for everyone, all at once, from the start, meaning that you don't have to go to extra length just to be able to walk up a stair or get up a stair, or an elevation. That is built into the design. And so while I think that most of us understand that not every game can be created for everyone, there are a few things we can do, and at the same time keeping ethics in mind. So for the ethics of a production chain, in particular with respect to games, there's the outer circle, which is the outside ecosystem, outside of games. Ethics there concern the treatment of workers, crunch culture, the equality and diversity at a company, the treatment that we have, the treatment of players, the treatment that the treatment of player data, what we do with it, how we collect it, how transparent we are, how safe the data is. Because if there's a data leak, that is a problem, right? If we are entrusted with information, we should keep that information safe. It's also the communication with and around the culture. The inner circle is what we put in the games, the treatment of player characters and NPCs, representation of varying ethnicities, sexualities, and genders, and how the game speaks to players, and how it speaks of player characters and NPCs. And then there's the meta layer, which is basically using the player's data to influence the game, such as recommendations. That's a fairly common thing in most multiplayer games now. You have recommendations of playstyles, you have recommendations of other games, etc. And it's also using what happens in the outer circle to influence the inner circle with patches, etc. Like there are things happening in the gaming culture, such as the uproar around loot boxes, that has an actual impact on the games that we are creating. And for all of these three layers, access is really important. Who is in, who is out, who has access to the resources, who is denied access to resources, who is empowered, and who is neglected. So, here's my theory. We live in an ecosystem, and each part of that ecosystem affects the other. Culture affects education, companies, and content. Education affects companies, content, and culture. Companies affect education, content, and culture, and content affects culture, education, and companies. Because one piece of the ecosystem is not cut off from the rest of it. We can ignore this. We can say that, well, the content of our game, it doesn't really affect the culture, but that would be wrong because I think it has a major impact. If there's a leak of player data, that's not just affecting the players, it's affecting the culture and future content through different strategies. And also the carefulness of the players. What are they willing to do, or what are they willing to put up with from the game companies? What are we willing to do to make sure that they are safe? If there's an uproar about a certain mechanic in the culture around games, it affects the company and the future content that we create. If the education changes to take in more marginalized voices and make sure that they are taken care of and actually enter game development, that affects the company that takes them in. And in the long term, it also affects the culture because it affects the content. So one thing that I want to make clear is that there is a difference between taste and barriers. Taste is basically what I enjoy playing. It's my taste in games. Barriers is about what I'm comfortable, allowed, able, or expected to play. So this is not talk about everyone make the same game that everyone likes to play, because that is impossible. This is think about things like accessibility, representation, actions, and culture in and around the games. A game is not less difficult because it's accessible. It does not change the enjoyment of a game because it includes many different ethnicities, genders, or sexualities. For marginalized groups, sometimes taste is irrelevant because of these barriers. You can't, or you don't have an opportunity to play something because you can't do it from, you have a cognitive impairment, or you have a mobility impairment, and because of that, you cannot play the games that you want to play. So basically, I'm going to go through the different types of impairments that we have, and that is cognitive, as I said. In this case, you can think about difficulty settings and tutorials to make things easier for people with cognitive impairments. You've got mobility impairments. Think about reconfigurable controls and allow peripherals. Some games won't allow peripherals because they are seen as cheats. There are visual impairments. You can think about text size, text coloring, contrast, and color deficiency filters. There's hearing impairments. You can add closed caption subtitles or subtitles at all. And then there is a cultural barrier, which is a representation in the form of ethnicities, genders, sexualities, and stories. Because we often forget about cultural barriers in our games. And one of the things that I think that you've heard bandied around is the historical correctness term, which is basically a way to gatekeep. It is a way to say that, okay, this game is not historically correct if we do not exclude all people of color. This game is not historically correct if we do not exclude all women. And that is just a gatekeeping tool. It's an excuse. There are plenty of examples if you dig deep enough. So let's start with education, because that's where most of us start. And that includes epistemic injustice. And epistemic injustice sounds like a massive term, but what it really is two things. Ignoring someone's knowledge because they're part of a marginalized group, such as belonging to a minority ethnic group or being a woman, for instance. Or when someone's experience is not understood by themselves or others because there are no concepts to explain it. Because people simply haven't thought about ways to talk about experiences. So what I would want anyone who goes into education to think about is, what are we teaching? What is seen as important? Every field is weighed differently. So are we giving enough consideration to soft and culturally key knowledge? Because I feel that sometimes we look at the hard skills, and those are the skills that we encourage. Basically, to be super blunt, is our outlook colored by our colonialism? And I think that the answer is yes, in many cases there. Another thing to think about is, who has access to this education? Who's expected to be interested in a game education? What is their reception when they get to that education? How are they received? One of the things that I did back in, I think it was 2008, I was an advisor at a game design school that just started up. And one of the students, an artist, had sent out a Christmas card with a Santa who was sexually assaulting a woman, half-naked woman. What does that tell women who are going to that school? What does that tell them? How welcome do you think that they feel when they see something like that? He was reprimanded, he was told not to do it again, but I think that to some extent the damage was already done. And it's also part of the culture, right? We do not really talk about these things. We do not talk about how harmful sexism can be when it comes to an educational or workplace setting. So what we can do, Benjamin Franklin said, an investment in knowledge pays the best interest. And everybody loves to quote Benjamin Franklin, so I figured I'd do it too. So one of the things that we can do is don't allow elitist thinking around games or skills to take root. How many times have you heard mobile games aren't real games? That is one of those things, right? Art is a soft skill. How does that affect the way that we treat artists? Another thing that we should definitely do is not allow sexism or racism or homophobia in learning environments, or transphobia for that matter. We should talk about movements in the culture and talk about how they affect the culture. Gamergate was very harmful to game culture. And we should talk about that in education, because that is where we can actually teach people what impact it actually had on the environment or the gaming culture. We should also try and support marginalized groups. We should support people of color. We should support different gender identities, different sexualities, all those kinds of things. And as companies and professionals, what we can do is we can make demands on the students and the education. If we go visit a school to talk there, or if we support a school as a company, we can make demands and say, are you following our guidelines? Are you making sure that there is a diversity plan, that there is an inclusivity plan? And if not, you can bow out. You can say that, well, we have these demands or these requirements for us to be able to do these things. So I think that the diversity goals for the company should definitely be reflected in the educations that are receiving support. And that is what we can do. And then there is the gaming culture, and I could talk about this for hours. I'm not going to put you through that. But I do want to ask you a question. Why have we built a culture where doing intentional harm is okay? Why have we done that? Because that is on all of us. I don't necessarily believe that games cause extremism, but I do believe that the culture around games do. Places like 8chan, 4chan, Reddit, those are breeding grounds for extremists. Those who cannot stay on Reddit, they go to 4chan. Those who cannot stay on 4chan, they go to 8chan. And on 8chan, everything is allowed. So the barriers, I think the barriers raised in the culture are our own doing. Through the years, we have created and supported through fear and inability to act, or in maybe not wanting to act. We have created and supported a culture that feels entitled to exclude people. The vocal part of gaming culture restricts entrance for those perceived as outside of the culture. And those gates, those barriers are completely random. I've even heard of there was a woman that I worked with who was told that she wasn't a real gamer because she was only playing Call of Duty. And that was one of the ways that this person could keep her outside of the gaming identity, because she wasn't playing, I don't know what he considered being a hardcore game, but I mean, she put in, I don't know how many hours of Call of Duty, but she still wasn't a gamer because he thought that she wasn't. So there's constantly moving goalposts that are being basically thrown at us just to make sure that we are not part of the culture. And as designers and participants in culture, we have the opportunity to design our games in such a way that gatekeeping becomes less prominent. Because if we include people, it's hard to exclude them in the culture as well. As an individual, taking on the gaming culture can feel a bit daunting. It can lead to harassment. It can lead to Twitter storms, petitioning your company to fire you, and sometimes that company will fire you. Personally, I had a Twitter puff a bear when I supported Baldur's Gate, a trans person in Baldur's Gate, and there were like 3 or 4 eggs coming into my mentions and mentioning fire her as well, and saying, you should fire her, she likes trans people. Obviously that didn't really happen, but one of the things that you should ask yourself when you're in a heated argument on the internet, because that's what happens on the internet, is ask yourself, Am I harming anyone by doing this? Am I harming anyone by saying these things? Am I flying off the handle when really I don't really need to react to this? Because sometimes conversations are pretty pointless. And one argument that you will hear, and it's been brought up more and more often the more we get right-wing extremists in power, is what about free speech? And free speech meaning that we should allow all ideologies to speak freely. But some ideologies are actively seeking to harm human beings by their moral judgments. So allowing them to speak brings about harm. Personally, and this is my very personal opinion, I don't think that we should allow everyone to speak, because I don't think that all ideologies are equal. So the ethically just thing might be to just not let them speak. This quote is from a video that Chief of Army Lieutenant General David Morrison put out when he found out that soldiers of the Australian Army had manipulated images of women in the Army, female soldiers in the Army, looking as if they were performing sexual favors to other soldiers, male soldiers. It's a very strong video, so if you want to see someone really putting their foot down, I definitely recommend looking at it. I usually look at it when I feel that I need a bit of a pick-me-up, because it's really it's a strong statement, and I wish that more people would create or would actually come out with those strong statements. What he said was, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. That goes for all of us, but especially those who, by their rank, have a leadership role, meaning that culture trickles down. You set the culture at the leadership layers, and that culture will inevitably filter down through the company. So what we can do is we can seed any communities that we control with a culture that we want. If you're part of a company and you have some power, make demands on the services that you're using, for instance. Make demands on the influencers that are part of your outreach. If you're a company, set up clear guidelines for acceptable behavior and make those guidelines ethical. If you're an individual, use some moderator tools at your disposal to be inclusive. Don't allow bullying. And any one of us who stood up to bullies know that this is hard. It's not a simple thing to do, and that's what I sort of started this talk with, that doing these things are not easy. They are a conscious choice, and it is a difficult choice, and it's something that you have to work on. And we are not helped by the services that we use because they operate on attention. And attention can be both good and bad. And I'm pretty sure that you followed like Facebook and Twitter and all of those social media tools that are basically saying, oh yeah, we'll deal with the bullies, and then they don't do anything because what they operate on is attention, and it's not good for their economical model to remove that attention. But what you can do, at least in your corner of the world, is not allow it. Now we come to companies. There are companies out there who, instead of protecting people in their payroll or in the culture, fire them. There are companies out there who are actively provoking marginalized groups in order to be edgy, both in content and in the workplace. There are companies who engage with the clickbait culture and use attention, no matter what attention, as a way to earn or earn money. It's an economical model for them. Don't be that company. Or don't work at that company. Make sure that there's an equality and diversity plan in effect with clear guidelines. Make sure the company follows that plan. Put them against the wall. Say that, do something about this. I was at a company at one point, when I was hired there, I asked for an equality and diversity plan. 5 years later, they still didn't have an equality and diversity plan, and that is required by law in Sweden. So hold the company accountable and make sure that they follow the plans that they have in place. And having a business model that makes money off of attention, no matter what kind of attention, is most likely not ethical, because negative attention usually takes precedence over positive attention. We're more inclined to get upset and be angry than we are at being positive and kind to each other. And finally, the development teams, because company culture can sometimes be different from development team culture. And in one development team, at a really good company, I was actually told by a programmer one morning, I was coming into work, and he was standing there with his cup of coffee, and he told me straight out, women can't make games. I was like, okay, we'll pop this on. And he was like, well, women can't make games, so I don't understand what you're doing here. And I was like, well, no, I don't understand what I'm doing here either when you're saying that. Fortunately, I have really good help from my producer. And so he was told he could not tell me things like that anymore, which was, yeah. He went from commenting on how crappy women were at making games to commenting at how red my hair was. I had colored it red at that, or dyed it red at that point, and that the food that I ate was disgusting. So he was a really cheerful person. I think that he was just looking for things to remark on. But I also remember several times when code in various games would have been revealed and discovered to have misogynistic content or contain slurs. It's not unusual. Would you want to work at a company like that? Because I would not. I remember several project meetings at various companies where rape jokes have been the norm. Would you want to work at a company like that? I didn't. I got out. I remember being sent really long emails when GameGate first started up around my political views and my inability to keep them to myself, which was basically, in Sweden at that point, there was a magazine that, a gaming magazine that created a petition to support Zoe Quinn. And basically what they asked for was, can Swedish game developers please sign this petition and support her? And that's the link that I sent out. And in return, I got really long email about how I was stepping on people's political opinions, basically. So that was fun. I remember being asked if, do women like this? As if I'm all women. And I remember being interviewed by men and only men for so many times when applying for a new position. So what can we do? Well, we can have a code of conduct that applies to all levels of the company. We can hold the project leaders accountable to this code of conduct. If you are a project leader, hold yourself accountable to the code of conduct. And make sure that there are representatives of marginalized groups having the opportunity to weigh in on potentially damaging portrayals of NPCs or player characters. One of the more fun things that I recently read about in a book called Ruined by Design, which I can't remember the author of, sorry, was he told a story about how a Silicon Valley company held a workshop about what women want and how women think. Instead of actually talking to women, they held a workshop around what they thought women wanted, which I found very amusing. So there's that you can avoid doing. And make sure also that the hiring process for your team includes marginalized groups, that you have women represented, that you have people of color represented, that is not just a panel of white dudes sitting there talking to you. And then there is the content, which I think is the easiest thing to affect and at the same time the hardest thing to affect, because we have such a mono culture in games, we have such a homogenous culture in game development, that it's hard to break patterns. So there are barriers to enjoying content in games that have very little to do with the content itself. As I was talking about earlier, accessibility options are often cut from games because development costs too much, and they're put at the bottom of the list of things that we need to do. We keep making excuses to keep our protagonists male, white, and heterosexual. Content that's edgy or seen as edgy is most likely an attempt to shock, gain attention, or it's just laziness. People just don't think about what it is that they're doing. Because I don't want to have to think about people I might hurt for this piece of content, so I won't think about it, because that's the easiest way to deal with it. So by limiting the stories that we write, by limiting people's access to games, I think that we limit ourselves. We limit access to games for people outside of the narrow definition of mainstream. We have a very narrow definition of mainstream. It is not true anymore, despite how much some local gamers might want it to be true. Everybody plays. And I think that the largest group of gamers, largest growing group of gamers are women over 50. So consider that. We limit opportunities for marginalized groups to see themselves as heroes and powerful actors in and on the world. And so to reiterate, games have power, the power to change lives. As you saw at the start, the testimonials, games actually change lives. So let's make sure that they change lives for the better and not for the worse. So as a final question, why have we spent so long avoiding the difficult questions? I think that in many ways the culture or the industry is damaged by the moral panic that was created around it. For a long time, a lot of people stated that violent games make people violent. This is not true according to research. But it also created an inability for us to see that games may have a negative effect, regardless of what that effect is. Because if we do admit that, we open up a really big can of worms that we are not really ready to open yet. So as long as we cannot speak in a nuanced way around games and game content, I think that we're gonna have a really hard time talking about these things. So in conclusion, we can't look at the content we provide as freestanding from other aspects of the ecosystem that we're building. We can't ignore how the ecosystem ties into all aspects of game making and the decisions we make. We need to start taking responsibility, not just for our own small part in game development, but the repercussions our decisions have across the board, on culture, on education, on our companies, on the development teams, and on the content. Do you have any questions? You're all sort of quiet, terrified in the face of my rant. Yes. I think you were first. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'm wondering, as designers and practitioners of good user experience methodologies, what is the first actionable that we can do as designers, creating the experiences from a bottom-up approach to create experiences that include in our workspaces productive participants in the process?
I think that the best things that we can do is ask questions. Why? Why are we doing it this way? Why are we, so for instance, as an anecdote, the first script that I read for Mad Max had no women in it. And I asked our narrative director why, and he was just like, I didn't even think about that. So those are things that we can do. We can ask why are we doing this? And for who are we doing this for? Because sometimes our decisions or the design features that we are asked to build are not because of the user, they are because of the company. The company wants something. Is it because they want more money? Is it because they want data? Why are we doing this for them? Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
You had a question.
Yeah. How do you, I guess, like, balance meaningful, like, technical inquiries versus, like, making things that are more subtle? For example, if you simply have gay characters, maybe they aren't explicitly mentioned, versus having a focused narrative on how the gay character goes through, like, their dating lives and, like, how that impacts them, right? Like, I guess, what I'm trying to ask is like, where can we, I guess, I don't know, sorry.
No, I sort of understand what I think I understand what you're asking, which is basically how do we.
Should we put more effort into more meaningful content or more kind of like subtle content so that it's not so, I guess, focused? Like, is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, that's a really good question. What I would recommend is ask someone that you know is gay. And if you don't know someone who's gay, get to know someone who's gay and ask them, is this a good representation? Am I doing justice? And not just one gay person, because one gay person does not represent all gay people. So it's sort of I think that the most important thing that we can do is ask questions. Ask, is this a respectful representation of what I'm trying to represent according to you? And put it in the game. And if it turns out that you get a lot of criticism, don't say, well, you know, I did actually ask a gay person and they said that this was okay. Take the feedback and take it in and say that, okay, I'm really sorry that we did this, we won't do it again. It's the only way to do it, like, because you cannot have all experiences in yourself. You cannot be a representative for everyone in the entire world. But what you can do is you can ask those people to give you their opinion about what it is that you're creating. And it's a lot of work, and it's hard, and it's like, it will force you this sounds really bad. It'll force you to make friends with gay people. And that's actually a very positive thing. It's good to widen your horizons. It's good to have a lot of different kinds of cultures, a lot of different ethnicities, a lot of different experiences in your sort of circle of friends, because it will make you richer as well as a person. So, you had a question as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit about like the attention-based model that a lot of other media use. Over the years, have you found that there is another media industry that's like it's getting way better and making a lot of positive steps towards the right thing? And if so, are you able to like, get an understanding of what they did differently?
No. Sorry.
I think that says something too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of does, right? Because it works. The attention model works. And unfortunately, we as a species are very sort of combative, and we like it when things get a bit, you know, we get excited and we get aggressive and we sort of want to we have a lot easier time digging into the negative than we have into the positive. And that's also one thing that I would like to reinforce here is that we have a massive positive impact on people. Massive. Like the testimonials that I showed you at the start, those are just like the tip of the iceberg. There are so many people who feel that their lives have been made better through games. So we should look at that aspect as well and maybe raise that a bit more than we usually do. Yeah. I think it was you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, me and a fellow exec at the Game Development Club at McEwen are preparing a lesson on respectful inclusivity and diversity in games. Would you have any suggestions as we lead up to that day and are preparing our lesson and what to talk about and how to go about expressing that to the other members of our club?
Do you have a flowers? I mean, what you can do is like, is the team preparing the lesson? Are you diverse? Do you have a lot of experiences? Or
Finch, the lady who's working with me, is gay, but other than that, there isn't a lot between us, I suppose.
It's
just the two of us.
Okay, well in that case, you know, but well, read up a lot about it. I know that there are different ways to approach the subject. One of the things that you should probably do is make sure that people take it seriously and not just, you know, blow it off. God, I wish I had some really good practical ways for you to do this, but I think that the best way is just do research. That's the easiest way to deal with it. I think I might have some tips, books and stuff, but not off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Sorry. Was there another? Yeah. There were other questions, but I'm not quite sure who was first. Who were you? Who were asking me questions? Raise your hand. Okay, so there's a car from you. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, so you obviously have a lot of experience working through a lot of companies, and I was wondering if you had any tips on figuring out which companies mean it and which ones don't. Because they might just add a lot of these clauses, and they might tell you all these things up front when you're interviewing with them. Do you have any tips on like really figuring out if that workplace means what they say?
Not really, unless you work there for a while. Usually, when you interview, it's really hard to pierce that layer. Sometimes you can through the interview process, how they treat you in the interview process. I've been in a couple of interviews where people haven't even looked at me, and at that point you feel, okay, this is not the company I should be in, or they ask you really inappropriate questions, or they sort of burrow down into your gaming skills just to see if you have the skills that you say you have. I remember one time way back, I was interviewing for a company in Sweden, and I was in a 2-hour-long interview, and the 2-hour-long interview was basically me going through Spyro the Dragon game just to prove that I actually played it. I didn't get the job, and I didn't want the job. But I mean, it's really, really, really tough. You can work at, you can ask them, obviously, do you have diversity inclusion plans? How many, if you're interested in ethnicities, ask how many people of color. If you're interested in diversity in other ways, ask how many, do you have any disabled people working here? And how are they included in activities, etc.? Do you have, but usually you can't really ask, do you have any gay people? Because that's not, sorry, it sounds really glib when I talk about it. Sorry, that's not my intent. But so sexualities is usually a really hard thing to ask about. However, how many women work here? That is a valid question to ask. And just try and get a feel for it. Like, usually intuition is pretty strong. If you feel that you're not being treated properly, then you probably should take it. Yes?
So based on user experience though, is it more about the main character, or would you say it's also more about like the NPCs to allow a user to pick their race, gender, and sexual orientation and then go through a story based on that?
It depends on what kind of game you're making, I would argue. If it is a game where you are allowed to pick your gender and ethnicity and sexuality and all of those things, I still think it's important to have representation from all kinds of cultures, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, etc. But I mean, it doesn't have to be in your face. It can be subtle, but it all has to do with, like, everything that has to do with user experience is contextual to the thing that you're creating. So depending on what it is that you're trying to create, the experience will be different. A game created by a large studio with a huge budget is going to be different compared to a game created by a small studio with a small budget, made for kids or whatever, you know. So it's all very contextual. So it's a hard question to answer just like that. But do your research, I think, is the best answer to it. Yes, that's right.
And kind of on that same topic of research, have you found there to be any particular models that have been effective for you in doing ethnographic research while creating your game spaces and pitches to whichever the department you're looking at?
Well, one of the things that I found is that it's hard to do that kind of research because it's hard to reach those players because they're marginalized, meaning that it's not easy to find them. So we have a lot of help at EA because we have a youth research lab, so we have a massive amount of players and we have a massive resource in that, which makes it a lot simpler. But if you're a smaller company trying to do something like that, it's hard. All of these things are really, really hard. So it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort to find them, but I mean, that's the best answer I can give you at this point. Yes.
What method of, I guess, presentation or representation have you found the content of games to be the most effective in tackling technical issues?
In tackling?
Technical issues.
Well, the reason that I'm standing here and talking to you is that I haven't really. Like I'm trying really hard. I think that what we're doing as developers have been very sort of individual. Some of us are trying to raise these issues and we're doing it as best we can in our individual corners. But I think that we need to think about these things in a more systemic manner because we are part of a system and we should take that responsibility. And that's basically what this is. It's a call to action. Because one person fighting that fight, it makes a difference, but it takes a really long time to make a difference. So the one thing that I can say is as Dave Morrison, the Chief Lieutenant General, whatever his title was, said, the standards you walk past are the standards you accept. Don't accept things that you feel are not acceptable when it comes to these things. If you see that we are creating content that will potentially do harm to someone, say something. That is the best way that you can sort of act on the world. If you have more power, then you can have more impact. If you have less power, you will have less impact. That is unfortunately the way the world works. I have left companies because I have felt that their treatment of marginalized groups in gaming it's been wrong. And at that point, I think that's the strongest statement that you can do. Unfortunately, primarily affects yourself. So if you can't afford that, if you have to keep the job that you've got, if you have to put food on your table, what can you do? Like it's a tricky thing, right? You have to walk the line or the balance and decide that this is where I draw my line. This is where I put my foot down. This is the standard that I cannot walk past. And decide that where are you on that scale? And sometimes it's okay to not have the energy to fight. Sometimes it is your obligation to. So sort of, again, contextual, because UX varies. Any more questions? Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Joseph, for the amazing talk. I hope you all have something to think about in the coming days and to implement in your own lives, your own practices. From here on forth, I was kind of doing casual networking stuff. So you all have name tags for a reason. Introduce yourselves to each other. Be nice. They're like, any good UX practice, what I'm trying to do is get some user feedback and to iterate on this thing, whatever this is. There's a link on the board. It's not very visible. I'll make it bigger, I promise. And then if y'all could actually head over and answer the survey for me. It's really short. It takes like about a minute. I really appreciate that. There's a post-discussion, post-event channel on the Interactive Arts Library Discord, which you can find just by Googling it, and on GameCamp Facebook page. Please join the server as a channel just for talking about this event and what you want to see in the future and what you gain from it. Continue the conversation back onto a forum where we can discuss it in more detail. So yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Osa. Let's all introduce each other and let's all talk.
In Ireland, it would be Sean. In Ireland, it would be Sean.
Really?
Well, no, because we already discussed this because I'm a Jonathan.
I don't believe we met. No, I'm cute by the way.
One of our graphic artists.
Oh, cool.
Exactly. So Finch is coming.
I have to admit, I'm not really. That's why it's. No, I mean, I don't have a good idea to be here then. It's a tricky thing. Like I said, Finch and I were and I think that's really good advice what you said. Don't let people destroy what you're saying. I think it's something. I mean, it's I'm never worried about representation. 9 times out of 10, I am yeah, so I think maybe my fourth year thing, my demographic is the one that's I'm going to get most because I can yeah, I think subtle versus overt ways to express representations. I think that's a good question because I remember watching the new Beauty and the Beast movie and live action and how you don't need to, it's not that great, but the food is portrayed as gay as a thing for Gaston, which is just the most hilarious thing ever. I think it's Josh Gad that plays it. Which he does a spectacular job. It's hilarious. I think that kind of thing. I think that more subtle. It's a little overt, but it's not too bad. I think that is like, to me anyway, is the most.
Well, yeah, the idea or the ideal is to get to the point where it is normalized, where you have a character that is gay and they're not the gay character.
Yeah,
they're the character. And there are some games that do it better than others, and so it's a whole argument versus tokenism versus.
I feel like the best example of that is just that it's like you don't even notice that. I think that's how it is.
Anytime you're telling a story, right, you're gonna have this focus. Like being able to realize that just because you're focusing on this story arc, like having a genuine expression of other characters is important. And I wouldn't say that something specific like being gay is something that overtakes my personality. But any individual person is an individual, and you can humanize that character. Part of that community is
well, it's also providing that spectrum. Providing that spectrum. Is this person's sexuality is integral to their identity, right? And if it is, how they train it, and if it's not, how they train it. Because like, have any of you guys watched the show Orphan Black? Orphan Black? Okay. So one of the main characters is super overtly good, and it couldn't be done in a way that was because of how overtly good he is. His life is defined by that. that it's not parody Octane, that's who his character is. And then, yeah, it's genuine. And then there's other characters in that show who that's not as easy, but unless it pertains to their actual romantic lives, right? And so it becomes a big deal when they're dealing with those romantic issues, but elsewhere it does get really bad. So
I actually think a good example when I bring up all the time is does such a good job because like the main characters is gay. It's like integral to this character. Yeah, it's totally. But it tackles
the one where that like that's where
the main characters is gay. It's like integral to this character. Yeah, it's totally. But it tackles so many issues. Sexuality.
The one where that like that's where
yeah, it's like the first episode, and he's like, yeah, he's like, I don't try to hide it.
But like all of those shots in Beauty and the Sea, it was there for the viewer to notice as well, right? And it's poking fun at the viewer for how you didn't notice and now you're going to make a big deal about it.
I guess talking about another TV show. You guys ever seen
Yeah.
I just learned like 2 weeks ago that this is actually I didn't know that. Do you know that? Yeah. It's very, very
Exactly, because he's a person.
Yeah, right. Person. Yeah, exactly.
It showed that he have, I mean, I'm sure he tackled some like, dialogue on that at some point, but that's not primarily what it showed. So it never had a reason to get lost. And that's again how it should be.
I think so.
I think it was last essay. I wasn't at the panel, but there's the panel on diversity and inclusion. I think so. From BioWare said that one of the biggest things that we got like, really positive feedback on was having an option to choose your gender and then to choose your pronoun, or and like that's like such an easy thing to put into it, but it's not something that people thought about, and to the people that it doesn't matter to, it's just another button. But to the people that it does matter to, it matters a lot.
That's a good way to think about it. It's like this tiny cost associated with a huge like positive impact.
Yeah,
and like no negative.
Yeah, like the few people that are going to make a stinking out. Who cares?
Yeah. I was actually impressed with Sims 4. Not that it came out, but I forget which update. Has now a gender slider. There's no longer like, and then there's like a tick a box saying you can get pregnant. And it's like there's a gender slider, and then you tick a box. And now it used to be just male or female.
Yeah.
It's this new system, which is perfectly elegant.
That's a really good one.
Like you say, if you don't care, you just right on one side or the other, and otherwise you get all this extra freedom. Unless then you can make guys and get probed by aliens and end up pregnant. Okay, well that's
go fulfill your
I think that's hilarious. It's a little side note. Maybe it's just me. I think that might be a DLC or something. Yes, it's a good idea. Super lots of mechanics,
I came from the US. I'm really Not really. But yeah. Or if my game can run it, or if my laptop can run it, then yeah, because sometimes I really want to say like large memory and RAM. It's like kind of my laptop overheats. It feels like it's gonna explode if I like play songs.
And I've been waiting to like starting my I'm also the game development here to like yeah. Last year. We're changing everything.
Well, it's like, I mean, it's not that expensive. It's just expensive in the short term. But in the long run, it's like a good investment. If you don't like
You know how to make it. I wanted to do it for a while. Also because we're making responses, laptops to get it to the point where I shouldn't be running anything. It's just can't. We're redoing everything. So that integrates
like the colors it shows on the screen, it's so bad.
Oh no, Homer! Dude, Thomas saved my thing. Man, why are angles like mine kind of freeze out? And I was like, man, I just can't figure it out. I thought I had to get the He's like, he goes with this like shotgun. Like, I don't want it. You don't have to. Definitely the 21st. I really enjoy UI.
Also, I only heard that you're like.
Okay, so I was this is gonna be 6 months. Look, these are the last 3 months. Whoa! I'm honestly
I'll sit here.
It's gonna. Yeah, actually, you know what? I believe that. Just kind of orange, right? 2 years before I'm out there. Yeah, I will never expect. Like, I don't know. No.
Yes, I'm here.
I have a friend of mine who says
That's okay, well, you don't really like.
Oh, we go around.
Okay, go.
Over. I got a name on it. Outside program. I write psychology. Maybe some the other. Haven't yet. I've been to
Wait, what? Why are you confused? Okay. So you have been fun. Okay, never mind. Never mind. I'm Jenny, second year with you in outside. Want to make games, want to learn how to play. Goals in life.
So close. They're like, oh, by the way, you can spend your entire life on Seth.
Yes.
I like making videos. I also like playing games. I'm one of the execs for the. I'm for the YEG Game UX. I'm one of the execs of it. Trying to get involved with the community. Yeah. Name is also Seth. I'm also executive. And that's the rest of it's like highway. Takes off face.
Oh, yeah,
Wait, so.
What do you?
So
Wait, let me guess.
What do you actually say? There's actually a game there. On Slack, I'm not that good at it. You said that, and I was like, I took intervals twice.
What? What are those?
That's not like this, like basically my favorite is basically so you have if you want to use the platform stuff, it's you need like a it's open source.
And you don't need to know.
It's totally there. I think underneath it's not you can. Some really difficult programmers like
We
Yeah.
talked about a passion.
UX is
It's not like, I'm motivated.
I'm interesting because UX design
All of them have different ideas.
because there's I don't have
I get that.
I would think about
Don't hear no music.
because when you're talking about
Like, yo, this is RPG. Thing now.
Okay, so if you're like a really good UX designer or game,
Which sounds like we need to show
a job interview and
platforms.
like essentially
You can network.
did they hire somebody because like you're trying
It's getting mini motor.
like how it's like how yeah, like if you work for UX,
It is the best phone slash
you want people to keep scrolling.
It is. It's sort of like rather than having a lot of people have
attention based. Think about this and talk about this so that the amount of attention you have is greater.
So, and then you have
the problem actually.
in many models, it's calculated systems. You have rows.
This could be that's a problem.
This could be another.
And
Ours are strong.
whether it's an obvious problem, if it's not a problem, at any fit, you can have somebody such a shit.
Yeah.
Do you follow that? You have an attention system. This might be bad. Right? If this is a problem, so all of these solutions are talking about.
It's not just
Maybe just physics support.
yeah.
They're just vying for attention.
So you have to sort of actually sort of
How do you find the middle ground?
like how hard you can.
And it's like I agree.
And you're only trying to connect
Some person who is down in the
one thing to
I
another.
want to support that.
Well, I guess that's true.
Right?
Yeah.
At the same time, as soon as I support this person, it's very likely that by supporting that person, somebody who's on the fringes ends up in a very
It is very common.
Yeah, just the I didn't know how to word it. But I can't make everyone happy.
Like, especially with two, in games specifically, if you're, I mean, it's pretty small, if you're one person, it's like,
It's
like,
all about the actions and just
artistic experience very likely is focused on right? I think what we're talking is
But,
and it's like,
yeah.
this is something that's I pull it out of the top of it's very valuable to
No, I haven't seen it.
You can stack
Is actually.
The main thing you have to adjust your because, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But sometimes you can make games where it's like stories for just a story, or to express a feeling, or just sometimes you can make a game for a concept, or like, I don't know, your opinion, to shout out your opinion. So some people might think it's not ethical, but what you're doing is just fake.
If you're going to talk about you don't
Well,
like
that's
as yourself, you have your own
that's the
bias.
problem, like, one of the
Luckily,
But like with some basically taking time with trying to understand and talk to them using right? Don't talk too much. But for example, I still can't use two screens on a Mac. That's why I think that for a lot of machine learning different at the same time, because what they're doing is they take out and make it they'll use exactly like a lot of physical metal isn't like so they're happy hosting jail functions. I'm only here for the inference is we take a training that model, you put it on a story, it's like a dramatic. Yeah, you have stories. Yeah, there's so many other stories in the world of other cultures. All it's like, maybe it's instead of like, you can keep reading some Spider-Man. What if, you know, people also stories from that's what really making I think that would be really big. Yeah, you're keeping the games I want to like I said, I'm good for it.
That's true.
That is a better way of looking at it.
That's the more you can empathize. Right? So I think as much as like you make an argument towards how much you try to
cool.
I want like I borrow your MacBook, but you're trying to
cater your experience just a little.
No.
I think also having that conversation and trying to understand the class of different people.
I can't even play
Snake on it. That's all. Even if I'm not,
You can't play well as a
point.
creativity requires
The fact that
no, do not say no to me. Okay, I will not.
Half the world.
I'm making changes in no videos. Now it's gonna be a little one. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe
It's also like
so now it's too big and I hold it or not. I can't have stuff in the box. What is this? What happened?
Yeah, even just at a very like last year I did last year I did a study on
It's
called Never People, and it's about it's about an Inuit story. And a lot of them were but they also made the game in such a way that it was like they were almost like doing consulting and all of that.
There's a one-dimensional RPG.
So that means they
There's a one-dimensional
have like what I'm for, you know, the new
Stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
it also migrates. So you can if you have feedback from the market, so trying to
Someone who just
this is a dark career.
Trying to get
What career?
create a lot of
Yeah. And it is, as you said, it is something that's obvious.
this experience is likely that's like how do you I have never
Yeah.